What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do a very quick demonstration of how the software works. So this is an example. This is just a bridge, but just before I get rid of it, the sector profile, see the section across the top here? That's similar to what you were asking about. So, if I shift the chart out, you can see, the sectors kind of follow along with the activities as well. So that's a feature. But just to quickly, what I'm going to do is start with a blank file. This is a absolutely a brand new file in TurboChart. I do have an example project in Primavera where I've already set up the required fields. Primavera's, there we go. Let me just connect to the right database. As long as it's an activity in Primavera, we can present it. What we can't do in Primavera and is, if you've got like a grouping band, and in this case I've organized by WBS, but if you organize by an activity code, for example, that is not actually an object in the schedule. So we can't pick up the dates of the grouping band as such. Whereas obviously if you have a WBS summary or a level of effort task, then it's the same process. You assign a shapecode value and assign the chainage values, and it will be available for importing. But so in this example, you can see it's just, as a typical schedule would appear. I have populated some of these shapecode values and I've put some of the chainages against activities. So that's as much as you need to do in terms of preparing the data in Primavera. Everything else is what you would normally do with a schedule, logic, durations, all those additional fields. Now, what I do in TurboChart is TurboChart works on the principles of what we call data sets. So a data set is a collection of or a listing of tasks. Now, I'm going to actually rename this data set to be original. And when I look at my original data set, there's no tasks. There's nothing, there's no information to present yet. That's why the chart is blank. So the first step I need to do is actually populate this list of tasks. And I can do that for this data set by actually connecting to my Primavera database. Right now, if your P6 is in the cloud, we have a few different ways that you can connect to it. My P6 database is local. It's on my own device, but I can still access that. So I'm here. I select the database. I can see the EPS and all the projects in it. So I select a project. I then map to the fields that I want to pull in. So in this case, I want early dates. My start and end location are the user-defined fields where that extra information is populated. I have a shape code, which is again a user-defined field. I don't want to pull in location codes. For this example, I'm leaving that as blank. I press OK. TurboChart goes to P6, connects and pulls in that information. And if I now close this, you can see all these gray bars represent activities from my schedule. Each one of these is an object, and if I click on it or hover over my mouse, I can see the details of this task. So when I click on this, I can see the task ID, the description, the values from Primavera, they're all there. But importantly here, what also gets imported is a list of all the shapecodes that I've used. So this is generated based on the data that's imported. And by selecting any one of these shapecodes, I can actually define how do I want these tasks to appear. So I might say, all right, I want piling to be this, blue color with a dashed black box, for example. And what I've called TBM, make it a solid orange line like that. And you essentially start building up what we call the shape library by selecting each of the individual shapes that you have and deciding, well, how do I want these activities to be presented? So, of course, I mentioned earlier, you can save and load this shape library. So I can actually say, well, I've already got a shape library that presents this information. Let me go to my charts. I just find the relevant file. We call it a TurboChart library file. And you can see that's already now populated my chart and made it look like this. Okay, so this is the basics of generating the chart. Now, something doesn't look right to me here. If I was looking at this chart, I would say, well, there's some really strange this doesn't look sensible to me. And the way we would do this in TurboChart is I can click on any one of these activities and I say, all right, I know that this is 1310. If I go back to my P6 schedule, I find that activity. Okay, there's activity 1310. Oh, it's 100 days, right? So this looks like it's a mistake. Let's just drop that. In fact, all of these look like they're mistakes. So I'm just going to drop these durations back to 10 days. I'm recalculating my network. So it's recalculated all the dates. Now in TurboChart, because this particular data set is connected to a P6 schedule, all I have to do here is what we call resync. So if I press resync from the menu or press Control R, it goes and grabs that data and redraws the chart and says, this is now what your data represents. Using this, we actually have a lot of customers who are, have dual screens and they're working with their schedule on one screen and working with TurboChart on a second screen. And as they're making changes to the schedule, they're just refreshing their view to see how does that look on the linear schedule, because obviously that's a much better way of understanding and viewing the schedule information. And so, the idea being, as I mentioned earlier, the philosophy was, we know how useful these charts are, but why should your effort and time be spent in just generating this chart? Your time and effort should be in working with the schedule, and the chart should be a fairly quick process of just presenting that information. The vast majority of Telos users, that's all they're using it for. They're not actually using it to recalculate, based on production rates and sequences, things. All they're doing is they're working with Primavera. We do get asked questions of, it would be nice to be able to click and drag and, so I can do that. So I can actually drag this activity, change it into a different position, but you can see it's not changing anything, right? Because, we want you to make that change in the central source of the truth, which is your schedule, because not only is that where, the logic's maintained, but, your resources, your connection to other dependencies, your schedule contains a lot of aspects such as design, engineering, approval, procurement that may not be on this chart. That change that I just made, for instance, you'll see it's highlighted now that there's red colors in here which says this is not the value that I had imported, but this is not fed back to Primavera. Ours is very much a one-way flow. And the reason we've done this is it's by design, because the moment you start saying, we want you to reschedule based on this, it's not just about the traditional finish to start type of relationships. You also need to take into consideration the physical space. So, I now have to say, well as the dates for the activities, I need to consider how does that relate to activities that are within the same area, and that information is not contained in the CPM logic. Right. So our approach was always, if you do want to understand, well, if my Station 3 demolition works is going to take 6 more months than I planned, don't make the change here in the chart. You know what activity is. Go back to your source schedule, find that activity, make the change in here. So instead of being at 50 days, let's make it 180 days. Because here, the schedule is where all your logic is kept. Because the risk is, even if you did change this and change the dates, you may have missed some other logic that isn't relevant to the activities that are shown on this chart. You might have logic connected from somewhere else that isn't being presented on this chart. So our source was always, make the change here, press F9, and you can see if I do a resync how quick it is to see the impact of that change. But at least you're doing it in the scheduling tool where the calculations are correctly made. So we don't directly calculate any progress, like we don't have percentage complete. The way I've seen and the way I would recommend it used in our software is we do have a feature that we call multiple data sets. I imported one data and I called it original. I'm going to create a second one, and you can't see it on the screen. MS Teams always does this for some reason, but I've just created a new data set called revised. It's blank. the screen's gone blank. You can see that there's no information there. But what I can do is I can actually connect. Let's say I think in here I do have another progress. Like let's say I have a progress schedule, some point in the future. It's mapped to the same fields, so that we're using the same user-defined fields. I don't need to rebuild that, but I'll import connect, bring that in, and you'll see what I can now do is this is a view of my revised data set. But what I can actually do is do this. I can say, right, present a second data set on the same chart, make it my original, and you can play around with, for instance, what we call the opacity. So that's how transparent that second layer is, and you can do things like you can just slightly offset things on the linear or the location axes so they don't get hidden. We have a thing that we call highlighters, and what I can do is just say, right, from the start of the project, I don't even know what the date is, Jan 2019, to the specified period. Like let's say I just pick the 30th of June 2020. Right, you can see how that's now a shaded area. So you can actually then turn around and say, well, our data date is 30th of June. Anything that's shown earlier than that period must be an actual date. So what I can do is, for instance, this is what I've called chart one. So let me rename this to say that's whole of project, right? So this could be the whole of project chart. What you can do on any one chart is you can actually turn on and off individual elements. So you can say, right, I want, just a selection of shapes presented on this chart. But what I'm going to do here is, so I have everything displayed on this one chart, but I can now go and create like a copy. So this is a duplicate copy, and I might say this is just Western Tunnel, for example. So what I can do on this chart is I can say, right, the range on this chart is just going to cover one section of the work, and in fact, I'm presenting this just for the tunneling team, so I only want a subset of activities presented, and that's now a chart, and I can print this off as its own chart if I wanted to. So sorry, I've added the what we call a print preview, so you can see there's a legend, and you can add title boxes however you want. But I can always revert to my original chart just by switching to the different chart. So it's all and because I have all my data sets saved, I can decide, well, which data set is presented on which chart as well. A few other features. We can flip horizontal, vertical. I know some people have a preference for viewing charts in this format. So this is a simple feature. Some people ask for time to go the other way. So, I mean, very straightforward. Again, I can do this for one chart and have this format, and you can have both. Like I've just done this to this one chart. Now, if I revert back to that Western Tunnel chart, you'll see it's in the format that I had for that chart. So it's very easy to flick between the two methods. We were talking earlier about adding an image and scaling it. So I can actually just say, right, I have a JPEG as a graphic file that represents the alignment, and I can say, maybe that only represents a specific portion of the location axis, so I can scale that to be, a certain. I even do things like, reducing the size that it occupies of the chart. This is a simple way of, of just adding that contextual information, because people like graphics more than just looking at the vertical grid lines. We have, obviously we have some features around configuring the presentation of the axes. We do have the ability to show what we mentioned sectors before. I'll open up an example. Actually, why don't I do that now? What I'll do is I'll open up a different example which actually has those sector graphics already built into it. So see here, we have all these, like the graphics of each specific section. So that is what we call a location library, and it's built up as a table like this. I should add, this format, whenever you see this format in TurboChart, and I can show you a slightly different way. So we have this thing called highlighters, which create these, the vertical bands, because I like to say on linear projects, people generally don't think about things in chainage terms. They think of physical landmarks. This station to this station, this bridge to this bridge, this creek to this creek. So it's much more visual to have those elements displayed on the chart than just a regular grid every 100 feet or 100 yards or whatever, format. So we can do that using highlighters, and we can actually grab this entire table, and I'm just firing up Microsoft Excel here. We can drop this table into Excel and manipulate this information in Excel if we wanted to. So in fact, instead of adding, why don't I just change all these? I'll make these much equals that plus 1,500, just as a way of. So I've just made a very quick change to that chart. I can copy that whole table, come back here, and if I watch these blue bands, they'll all get updated. Coming back to this slide, we can import schedules into data sets. We have shape libraries, we have what we call location libraries, and you can change the page layout as well, the format of the page. So one of the questions was, how can we plot this? So if I go to the page layout, I can specify a custom size of the chart that I'm working on. So I can say, let's make it 6,000 wide by, say, 500 high. Oh, I don't know if that's a sensible ratio. Let's make it 3,000. So you can see, see how the chart's much more like it's a long plot now. And if I close that, when we view the chart, that's how it stretches out to be that scale. The legend is generated from this shape library. Let me go back to the way I had this because it'll be a bit more clearer to demonstrate. So when we bring in the shape codes, so every shape code is identified, and in Primavera, you may add just a little short description. So you might say segments, but I can then call that segment, for instance, segment production as the description of this shape code. And if I present it in the legend, see how the description shown is here. So we do have an option that says, do you want every shape code? First of all, do you want it shown on the chart, or do you want it displayed in the legend? So I can take it off the legend as well by clicking this button. The software is available to download as a trial from our website. You can download it and install it and use it for 14 days without even having to contact us. There's no feature limitation. It's a 14-day trial, and we kind of have a rule that says if any trial user wants another trial period, we just need an email requesting it. So so sort of we'll give you a second trial period without hesitation. The vast majority of our users just learn it themselves. The reasons why it's fairly easy to learn is it doesn't have the complexity because it doesn't have the scheduling system, right? That's one. Secondly, no matter what you do in TurboChart, you are not damaging your schedule. Like there is no way that anything you do in TurboChart will break the source schedule. So even if you completely mess up the chart and it looks horrible, you've not done anything that will affect the source of that information. So just turned around and we've said, we're not a scheduling tool. We're purely just a graphical visualization of the data. But what you mentioned about being able to change the shape, change the colors was an important thing. Like we said, we know that users want to be able to present the chart in different ways. So let's make it easy for them to adjust the shape and adjust the colors so that they can experiment. And then once you've done it once, that's it. We've had one customer who said he downloaded TurboChart in the morning and by the afternoon was sitting with his client showing a chart. We don't have formal training, like certainly no classroom type training. What we typically do is I say, download the trial, start playing with it, make a list of questions, and then we'll book in a call with myself. It might be 1 hour, probably 1 hour's enough. Then continue using the trial. And then if you still have more questions, let's have another session. And honestly, 50% of the time, that second session never happens. The training scope for turbocharge compared to Tilos is not measured in days of formal training and weeks and months of learning. We measure everything in sort of hours. Like you play around with it for an hour or two, figure out the basic features. You might then have an hour session where we, show you the specific elements, and that's probably all you ever need. To give you an example, we do have one of these. If I talk you through TBM as an example, so in this case we've shown the assembly as a rectangle. This is what we call an area shape. So the way I describe it is areas represent activities that occupy space for a period of time, whereas a linear shape like a line or a parallelogram tends to be for activities that progress through an area over a period of time. We do have the ability to introduce calendar non-work periods, and they can change like the angle of shapes. So you see how there's this, like you can see, all right, now we don't import these from the schedule. The reason is, if you think about a typical Primavera schedule, their non-work periods are always like, weekends, and then every single, you constantly have this stepped function, which sometimes looks good, but most of the time is just distracting. So what we've done is we've said we can manually create those calendars, because you only create them for the major non-work periods. Like if you have a 2-week shutdown or a Christmas break, or some other major shutdown, you don't necessarily want to see every single Saturday, Sunday occurring on these charts.